My research uncovered that lynchings never stop. This report only goes back to the year 2000, but we found several other lynchings from the 80s and the 90s as well.
More than 130 years ago, black journalist and anti lynching crusader Ida B. Wells risked her life documenting racial terror in America. In her groundbreaking investigation, A Red Record, published in the late 1800s, Wells challenged official accounts that often dismissed lynchings as accidents, suicides, or justified violence. Now, during Women's History Month, a new report argues that the history Wells documented did not end in the past. I'm Esther Dillard, and in this special conversation, I speak with Jill Collen Jefferson, founder and executive director of the civil rights organization Julian, which is documenting what it calls modern day lynchings across the Deep South.
My research uncovered that lynchings never stop. This report only goes back to the year 2000, but we found several other lynchings from the 80s and the 90s as well that we plan to publish in a subsequent report. And so lynchings actually never stopped, is one of the things that we found out. And they're happening more frequently in the Deep South than in other places. The Deep South is historically where lynchings took place more so than in other places. And Mississippi is still leading the pack with the highest number of modern day lynchings.
But Jefferson says one of the biggest obstacles is not what happened in these cases, it's how many of them were investigated. Her report argues some deaths were too quickly ruled suicides before investigators had done the work needed to test other possibilities.
I saw patterns in, pretty much every time you have a situation where there's a shoddy crime scene, a shoddy investigation, the crime scene is not preserved. And then there is a ruling of lynching quickly, very quickly, before the investigation is even finished. So,
You mean
for
suicide,
example,
or you mean you said
I mean,
lynching?
sorry, suicide, yes, I'm sorry. Like, for example, in Willie Andrew Jones Jr.'s case, you know, the investigators ruled it a suicide within 40 minutes of being on the scene. They had not talked to a single witness. They had not roped off the crime scene. They'd done none of that. So, in so many of these cases, they're ruled suicides without really looking further at anything else.
And Jefferson says in Mississippi, her team noticed something else, a pattern, she says, others appeared to miss.
We found in Rankin County that Black men would often go missing around the same date and time every year or so. And so, for example, January 11th, 2008, there was like a 28-year-old man, Clint Javon Prater. He went missing from Flowood, Mississippi, which is in Rankin County. Then January 11th, same date, 2010, 26-year-old Lester Raymond Jones went missing from Flowood. January 11th, 2012, 41-year-old Ricky Lee Donald went missing from Flowood. And then, the pattern just continues. And so we noticed that pattern, and we hadn't noticed, and anyone else has clocked that.
That work, she says, is not just statistical, it's deeply personal. When I asked whether one case stayed with her emotionally, Jefferson described the first modern lynching case her team says it solved, the case of Willie Andrew Jones Jr.
Yes, I don't know if I've told this story publicly because I don't want people to think I'm crazy. But Willie Andrew Jones Jr.'s case, that was the first modern day lynching we ever solved. Willie was a 21-year-old Black man found hanging from a tree in his white girlfriend's front yard in 2018 in Scott County, Mississippi. And Willie's, all these families you get close to, you get really, really close to. And with Willie's family being the first, it was incredibly memorable for me and seeing what that family was going through. And I remember um, I went to we 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 figured out a way to get one of the lynchers jailed for contempt. And we did that so that I could go and talk to his girlfriend to see if she would turn on him. And I went to his house, um, And when I got there was a young black man sitting on the porch. And I waved at him and I spoke, and he didn't say anything. And then the girlfriend comes out of the house, and we leave and we go somewhere else to talk. And I later found out that there was no one at the house, but the person who was on that front porch looked just like Willie. When I saw him sitting there, I was like, that looks really so much like Willie, but of course it's not Willie, it's someone else. And I was wondering, why didn't this person wave back to me or speak back to me when I spoke to them? And so that's something that's always stuck with me. Like, and I believe that he was there to tell me that I was on the right track.
Mm. Was that case solved completely?
We solved that case. We know who did it, but the DA refuses to charge the lynchers, so they're still free.
Jefferson says that case is one reason she refuses to soften the language used in her report. When we come back, why she insists on calling these deaths lynchings and how her work connects directly to the legacy of Ida B. Wells. When we left off, Jill Collen Jefferson explained why her team believes some deaths across the Deep South were never fully investigated. But Jefferson says the pushback often begins with the language itself. Now, the word lynching, it really carries a historical weight. Why was it important for you to use that term? And what has been the response to that? Has it made it more difficult or more challenging to do the work you're doing? Or is it just give you more fuel to keep doing it? Because I'm wondering, because
Well,
when you use that word, it really it's powerfully packed. It's not something like when you say hate crime, it's different than lynching.
yes. Well, we call it what it is. These cases were lynchings. You know, I can say without a doubt that Raynard Johnson was lynched, that Willie Andrew Jones Jr. was lynched, that Nick Naylor was lynched, that I can go on and on and on and on. These people were lynched. And for the most part, lynched in terms of hanging them from a tree type lynching. And so I call it what it is. And there has been pushback to that, and people saying, is this real? Is this a real study? Did you just make this up? No, we're looking at all the facts, and we have a pretty rigorous methodology that we put everything through. And so there has been pushback, but I'm not going to stop calling it what it is.
She says her work is in part a continuation of the path carved by Ida B. Wells.
A crimson record is based in part off of a red record, which Ida B. Wells authored. And a red record was the first record of lynchings in America, whereas lynchings had been called suicides with a wink and a nod, or accidents and things like that. She set the record straight about the number of lynchings that were happening in America and the causes of those lynchings and the circumstances. And so what we wanted to do was something similar.
More than a century ago, journalist Ida B. Wells documented hundreds of lynchings across the United States, challenging official explanations that often tried to hide the truth behind those killings. Jefferson says that legacy directly shaped the work her organization is doing today.
We wanted to make sure that we created protocols, that we weren't just saying, here is a problem, but that we also came up with solutions.
Jefferson says her report does more than identify a problem. It also lays out what she believes must change, from stronger death investigations to better trained coroners and independent prosecutors.
So there are several changes that need to happen on the federal level, on the state level, and on the local level, and we talk about those. And so on the state and local level, especially in Mississippi, the requirements for coroners need to be increased. To be a coroner in Mississippi, all you have to have is a high school diploma or equivalent and pass a test. And so these are people that are coming up with cause of death determinations. So and they don't even have to have a college degree. They don't even have to have a degree in a medical field to do this. And so one of the things that we are proposing is that we increase the requirements for coroners. Another thing that we're proposing is changes to the standard operating practices of police forces in suspected modern day lynching cases. And so we list out protocols for them. If it's a hanging, taking photographs of the knot, of knots from all angles, taking photographs of the anchoring object from all angles, making sure that you're not coming to assumptions quickly like they've done in so many cases, that they're not ruling out the possibility of lynching. On the state level and on the federal level, there need to be anti-lynching bills. There is already a federal anti-lynching bill, but it is toothless. It absolutely does nothing to help with these cases. And so some things that need to be added to that bill, there needs to be an independent cause of action for lynchings that's separate from the current hate crimes law. There needs to be a cause of action that will allow an independent prosecutor to file charges right in federal court for this. And backing up a little bit, there needs to be an independent prosecutor appointed in these cases. In any suspected MDL case, there needs to be an independent prosecutor, because local authorities they're biased in this, and they bring their own assumptions, and they also lack the training.
The organization Julian has now created what it calls the first national database tracking modern lynchings and hate crimes across the country. Jefferson says acknowledging that history, both past and present, is the first step toward accountability. And she believes the work Ida B. Wells began more than a century ago is still unfinished. You can learn more about the report and the cases documented by Julian on their website. For The Color Between the Lines, I'm Esther Dillard.